Greetings. I'm Lynn Tracy, the U.S. Ambassador to Russia, and I am pleased to welcome you to the American Center in Moscow as we explore and celebrate the American tradition of quilting. You will discover during this series that quilt making has a long and rich history in the United States. From the earliest settlements, where the lack of textiles made patchwork patterns a necessity, to the community bonds that quilting bees strengthened in the 19th century. And in passing the craftsmanship down through the generations, quilting proves a vibrant through line in our history. I have loved the beauty and artistry of quilts for as long as I can remember. Especially captivating is the patchwork of colors and shapes that blend in a tapestry as unique and vibrant as each quilt's creator. Even more than the aesthetics, I have come to love the symbolism quilting represents. The warmth woven into each strand, the history behind each pattern, the personal experiences that enliven every story behind every quilt. I began collecting and displaying quilts as a diplomat to share this wonderful tradition, which is very popular in my home area in Ohio. Here in Russia, I have enjoyed learning about local traditions and adding to my collection. And so in that spirit of celebrating the cultural impact of the stories and lives that animate our traditions, I invite you to tune in to our AMC series of speaker events and learn more about the role of quilting in American culture and history.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and present first, and then we're going to have a little conversation. I'm going to share why I quilt, and I am an American quilter. I am in Chicago, Illinois. I quilt for self-compassion, for connection, play, and legacy. I'm going to share those things and some images of my work. So we'll go next. Okay, this is me on the beach in Chicago, Illinois, in the Midwest of the U.S. And I'm just running along with a quilt that I take quilting everywhere with me. Slow stitching is something it's a repetitive motion. It's time set aside for me. It keeps me calm. It's something that slows me down. It helps me manage stress and anxiety. It's a type of art making that is very tactile, and I love feeling the fabrics. I'll show more about this in the next slide. It's a chance for me to be imperfect, something that makes me present. It's an act of kindness that I give myself, an act of self-care. Okay, and the next slide. It also has helped me discover a lot about myself. There's a lot of motifs that emerge that keep repeating that I don't really plan on, that help me reflect, like this diamond motif. It's also portable. I even can carry in this vest I made at a quilting retreat. I can even use magnets on a vest and carry around threads so I don't have to ever set down sewing. But handwork is really something I can do in the car along with my family. Okay, in the next slide. It's something that I don't need a studio outside of my home to make art. My dogs and my kids walk across my quilts and they're okay. They're used to seeing me making work, and they make art alongside me with other materials, found materials like cardboard. And then here I am with my family, once again taking care of my quilts, sewing in my backyard. So it's something I can take outside of a studio. And it's a way for me to connect with my family, with my kids. They'll always see me being an artist when I'm not at my day job. Okay, next. Also, I've been able to reconnect with my mom, who was a quilter. I grew up in a home with a mom that was always sewing on the machine, and I'm more of a hand sewer, but she was always sewing and collecting antique quilts that we would find at antique malls. And I didn't really understand why until I got older, why those were so special. My sister and I have reconnected. She has young children and she's taken up quilting. And I've met a lot of friends. The quilting community that I've met is so open to sharing ideas. They're so encouraging. I've joined some quilting communities like Zak Foster's Quilting Nook. I've taken a lot of virtual classes through social media. I've connected with a lot of quilters, and it's just felt a really sense of belonging being around a lot of like-minded people. And I've been able to meet a lot of these people in person. And so quilting also has been a chance for me to playing with color, texture, movement, possibility. Well, what if I could draw directly on fabric and make quilts? Maybe quilts can be almost anything. So just the rhythm of making, process over product, no pressure just to get it right. Playing can just be a time to just experiment, something that I don't have been given permission to do. I can just pay attention, be curious. Let's go to the next. I can explore materials that maybe aren't considered traditional quilting cottons. I can play around with synthetic and natural fibers and shiny and sheer and just kind of see what happens. And I can work on a small scale when I'm busy working during the day and I just want to make something small at night just to play. Okay, next. Also, I'm a high school, so I'm a public school art teacher. So I work in the Chicago public schools at a school that has, so I teach 15 to 18-year-olds, and I teach a textile class. But even if I didn't teach textiles, I'd be introducing my students to textiles. And so there's just a lot of things that I get from them or from the space that I work in during the day. I see a lot of opportunities like, wow, look at this cool brown piece of paper that my students painted on, spray painted on. What if I photograph those things that would normally be thrown away and printed them onto fabric? And so this is a recent quilt on the right that I finished that I guess, is a collaboration between my students and I. So images that my students collaborate on, maybe unexpectedly in the art room, and then I get them put onto fabric, and then I keep appliquing with found fabrics and secondhand materials on top of them, and drawing and making marks and seeing what happens. And this is a quilt. And then legacy. So I think a lot of my role as a teacher is like mentorship and kind of, I'm so excited about these past 6 years of me rediscovering quilting kind of in a modern way. And how can I pass this down to young people so they can feel the same thing? And a lot of them, so it's not just they think they're going to learn skills from me, so how to thread a needle and how to sew, but really they're able to maybe connect with their family and their relatives who are quilt makers or who hand sew. They learn this act of slowing down. They're in community with each other. They're sharing time. They're learning how to put their own stories and family stories and their personal values into their textile work. So this is really fun that I'm able to kind of like transfer that to them, because I know that was transferred to me from my older relatives that were sewers. And so also with labels, a lot of quilts throughout history have no labels on them, and we don't, unknown makers. And so we can only kind of guess by the fabric and the style of what time period they're made in. So I'm really trying to pass on that their quilts are records of the time and place and themselves that they're living in, and how to label their work so that future generations that may find their work way after they're gone will know about their this piece of art they've made, this textile piece. And then just kind of really looking at, while I would love to stay at home all day in my home studio, which I'm in right now, and sew all day, every day, I also do really value the time that I am going to work and I'm going to school and I'm working with my students, because I'm taking things that I see, this, like, for example, this aluminum foil bow that one of my students made that I would normally think would be a really cliche and expected symbol, that I might discourage students to do and kind of think more originally. I took that and just like put tons of bows onto a quilt recently. And so things that I can take from them, and then things that I can teach my students, like tying a quilt, and then I can do it in abundance on my work and maybe a larger scale. So kind of thinking of it full circle, like inspiring this next generation of quilters, but then also me taking home a lot of things that I learned from them. So yeah, if you want to keep in touch, this is my email address, Amanda Nadig Art, and I'm on Instagram, and I have a website. And I just feel like quilting should be a really accessible thing for anyone to try. And yeah, thanks for letting me share today. And so Heidi Parkes here was one of my teachers, my first quilt teacher. So I grew up with quilts, but I didn't really think it was something that I could do. So I took a quilt class from Heidi Parkes in 2019, and it lit a spark in me. And I went home and made more quilts that same day, because I traveled up to Wisconsin a couple hours where Heidi lives to take this quilt workshop. And I came home, made more quilts, and haven't stopped since. So what a great person to follow. And I'm really grateful for Heidi. Heidi is one of those people that has been part of my quilting community. That's been really inspiring to me. So now we're going to hear from you. I'm excited.
Oh, Amanda, thank you so much. Yes, it's such a wonderful story to be able to tell, and especially getting to look back and see you sharing the photos of your students. I was a high school art teacher in Illinois for 9 years. And then in 2013, I finally made a quilt out of fabric instead of paper or metal or all the other strange art school supplies that I had been making quilts out of. And so that's when I fell in love with quilting. And within 9 months, I was quitting my job as a teacher to become a full-time quilter. So I love seeing the way that you have been able to do both in a sustainable way for a long time, and especially those beautiful images that you have of your students influencing your work and you influencing the work of your students. That relationship is so exciting, similar to how our student teacher and now peer in the quilt world relationship has been. I also just wanted to say that I had not seen your vest magnets yet. And that's so genius to be able to keep track of your little scissors when you're sewing and not have it run away on you.
Yeah. Keeps it out of your mouth, you know. Yeah, no,
yes.
I know you're good at discouraging that. It's not a healthy practice.
You not want to inhale.
Or in anyone in the couch.
So everyone, thank you so much for being here. I am joining you from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So Amanda and I are both living along Lake Michigan, one of the Great Lakes in the Midwest, central part of America. And here you can see me with one of my recent quilts that I made last year. It's called So Many Small Things. And it's actually a pretty unique quilt for me in that, especially on the left, it's machine pieced. And then a lot of the other dots are hand pieced, and it is hand quilted. I mostly hand piece and hand quilt everything. So this is unique in the sense that I used the sewing machine to create it. And here you can see me hand quilting. I've got two thimbles on my fingers. My ring finger has a pushing thimble, and my index finger has a pulling thimble to help bring the needle to the other side. And for me, the handwork is so fun. I would say when I think about why I quilt, the top reason is that it is such a deeply enjoyable experience to be quilting by hand. And that's the top reason. And that then when I made my career quilting, it was partly because I wanted to spend as much time making quilts as I possibly could. Here you can see me quilting in a group with community, and this is an artist residency that I did throughout 2024 at the historic Pfister Hotel in downtown Milwaukee. They have an artist in residence program, and I was the 15th artist to occupy this room and be able to make my quilts inside of it and share my art with people. And it was really a pleasure to be able to invite the public in one day a month to have an open sew, as you can see us doing here. And so people are sitting on the floor and couches and they're sewing, and I'm sewing alongside them. And that element of sewing in community is something that I love and something that I think of as being a very important American tradition. We hear a lot of stories growing up about quilting bees and about, for example, people making quilt blocks throughout the winter in their home. And then in the summer, they would get together and they would take turns helping to quilt each other's quilts. Here now, quilting is becoming ever more an independent project, something that we do alone rather than helping each other make quilts collaboratively. But that feeling of community and wanting to be able to sew and talk with other people at the same time is very much alive. And I'll continue talking about collaboration throughout the presentation. I also teach, and one of the things that gives me a lot of joy is seeing other people play with some of the ideas that I get excited about. And so for me, getting to teach and then seeing Amanda just fall in love with quilting so deeply since 2019 is so exciting to me, because she's working with some similar ideas, some similar ways of creating and playing with quilts and doing maybe unconventional things that don't look like the typical quilt you picture. That I'm so curious about what a quilt can be that I feel like I will only be able to scratch the surface of answering that question in my lifetime by teaching other people and allowing other people to be part of that research and curiosity. I also get to do quite a bit of exhibiting my work. And so this past weekend, I flew to Athens, Ohio, also on the Midwest, but kind of the East Coast cusp of the Midwest. And there at Quilt National, it's an exhibition that happens every other year. And I was excited to be in the exhibition and then also to receive an award. I received Best Handwork. And that means anything that's done by hand. So it could be the hand quilting, the hand applique, the hand embroidery. You can see on this quilt, there's a lot that it's done exclusively by hand. And for example, these rabbits are embroidered by hand. I have a lot of embroidered text, and as well as hand applique. So these are some of the details on this quilt. The bit of technology that you see here is a tripod with a horizontal arm on it. That is how I set up my camera so that I can teach things online and I'm able to present things that way. So it's like a tool that allows me to connect with the world and teach on the internet, which is a big part of how I have a sustainable full-time career as a quilter, both from teaching quilting and from selling my quilts. And then here you see my arm on the quilt, and I had a momentary bit of physical trouble with my arm. I had some problems with my shoulder, and putting this on the quilt was a reminder to do my physical therapy homework when I was visiting my mother, who lives in Florida in the very southeast corner of the United States. So that reminder was very helpful to me. I have another exhibition happening right now, and this is at the Wisconsin Museum of Quilts and Fiber Art. That is the space where Amanda and I met. And it is a museum that has 4 exhibitions a year. So I'm coming up on the end of this 3-month exhibition. And it has been so special for me. And you can see that the museum is not a conventional white wall museum. It is a museum that has wooden walls, and it was originally a barn. Here in the state of Wisconsin, we're especially known for cows and making milk and cheese. And so the barn is a really important thing for us here in Wisconsin. And so having quilts in this space allows them to float mid-air in this very large room, as well as against the walls. And I think having a dark background, especially behind a white quilt, as you can see on the left here, allows them to glow and look very, very special. And I've exhibited both in textile museums like this one and in art museums in America. And it's fun to be in both kinds of museums that specialize in quilting, as well as museums that specialize in art in general. And then quilting is one of those kinds of art. Here at the Wisconsin Museum of Quilts and Fiber Art, I made an exhibition catalog, which essentially is a book, a 72-page book. And we flew in my good friend, Roderick Kirikoff. He is a writer and researcher about about quilts. And he's an author of many, many books about quilts. And so he and I were both signing our books at the opening reception for my exhibition, which was titled Soft Magic. And I would highly recommend his book. It's called Unconventional and Unexpected Quilts Below the Radar. And it's an awesome book. And it was such an incredible moment for me to get to sign a book alongside him. You can see he's a little bit older than me. And so it's kind of that generational baton passing. He's such an incredible advocate for this new generation of quilters. And he's also an amazing advocate for getting quilts acquired by museums and protecting that legacy so that we can continue to see older quilts and learn from them and just enjoy their beauty. This is me with the other people in the exhibition. So you can see I'm standing next to Roderick on the right side of the photo. And the other quilters in this picture, unfortunately, Amanda had already driven home, I think, for the night. It was a last-minute group photo. But many of the other artists in the show are people who've taken classes from me. And it was very special to be able to highlight that legacy of people who've learned from me and celebrate how incredible their quilts are in that exhibition. And then another way that I exhibit quilts is at quilt shows. So you saw quilt museums, I talked about art museums, and then this is a quilt show. And this quilt here in the middle, Yes More Please, is a quilt that I made collaboratively with Zak Foster. He's going to be presenting next. And this quilt was a true celebration for the two of us. It was made collaboratively. So we sewed it together here in Wisconsin when he visited me. And we were just both so thrilled that we're able to have sustainable full-time careers as quilters. And we wanted to manifest more of that and express our gratitude that we can live this life that we dreamed of. And then here in the bottom right, you can see that Zak and I got 2 awards for this quilt, and then I got 3 other awards for different quilts that were in that exhibition this recent February. Another important reason around why I quilt is storytelling. And within storytelling, there are 3 things that I believe I'm doing when I'm making these quilts, and that is cognitive reframing. That is the work that I do when I see my therapist for my mental health, we talk about the stories that I tell about the past, and we unpack and think about, are these stories true? Are these stories helpful? Are these stories kind to me and others? And as we look at those stories that I'm telling about the past, sometimes we decide that we need to reframe them. We need to retell the story. And so we are able to arrive at a place where I'm feeling healthy and empowered and encouraged by the things in the past rather than weighed down by them. And then also the quilting allows me to stay present when I'm focused on the present moment. I am also a certified yoga instructor and yoga therapist. And especially in my yoga practice, I think about meditating and other ways to stay connected to the current moment, to not be constantly ruminating about the past or living only for the future and not aware of what's happening now. And then lastly, I work on manifesting. So thinking about, what do I want in the future and how can I hold that deeply in my heart to make it happen? And so that I'm aware anytime I see an opportunity to move towards the future that I'm dreaming of, I'm able to see that, recognize it, and work towards it. So for example, this quilt, Yes, More Please, it is reframing the past a bit. I'm not lamenting that I used to be a high school art teacher or that I wasn't always making a sustainable income as a quilter. And in the beginning, it was very financially precarious for me. But instead, I'm saying, wow, it was hard, but I got here, and I'm so happy about that. And then I'm also manifesting because I'm saying I would like more of this into the future. So here are some other ways that I work with those three realms of past, present, and future. I like to refer to my quilts as diary quilts. And a diary, in the American tradition, is a private notebook where you write and reflect about the day, or reminisce about the past, or make plans for the future. And that privacy is something that I uphold by using abstraction in my quilts. So some things in this quilt, for example, you can recognize, like a rabbit, a flower, a handprint, but other things have subtler meanings. And an example of that is this recent finish. It's my most recently finished quilt, and you can see it's in the Soft Magic exhibition. And you can see it being made in progress in my home studio. So I've got my fabric out on my coffee table, my couch is ready for sewing, the ironing board is out, and here I am working on things. And one of the things that occurs a lot in my work is a calendar. So next to the ladder, which is hard in the beginning, and then it gets easier later on, which is maybe a connection with Yes, More Please, you can see this calendar where the days are blue, and then the days are this more white fabric. I also have what I like to call a foot bird. I stepped on an ice cube and twisted my foot very unfortunately, and I wasn't able to go to yoga class. You can see all these yoga mats on the quilt. And by thinking about that applique bird and making it with my actual foot. So you can see there my toes and then my foot with the socks in it. I was able to think about the future and manifest that if I am good and rest and don't go to yoga class for a while, I will have lots more yoga classes in my future because my foot will heal from that rest. This is another quilt in progress. It's the one that just recently won Best Handwork. And you can see it in progress, just those early stages of a quilt coming to be itself. And this fabric in particular is from a shirt from my dad. He passed away at the age of 69 back in 2018. And I like to feel like he's watching over me, or that I'm continuing to hold his memory in my heart. And so this was the very first time that I used some of his clothing as fabric in a quilt to stay connected to him. And then, of course, this is the finished quilt. This is a quilt that I made, again, noticing leaps forward in my health and in my work as an artist. And it is the representation of 2021. So in the top left is the calendar for January, and it loops around all the way down to December in 2021. And I made this quilt in 2022. And essentially I was saying, wow, how was this such a wonderful year for me, with a lot of acknowledgement that maybe it wasn't a wonderful year for other people. And for example, 2018 was kind of a hard year for me. So noticing that we all have years that feel good and that don't feel good. And on a year that for me, I felt really lucky with personal relationships, with financial success in my career, and some big successes for my health, I wanted to look at that year, better understand it, and invite more of those good things into the future. This is a quilt that has my figure on it. You can see my body is here when I'm sleeping, as well as when I'm sleeping on my side. And then this is my brother's pug, Penelope. She's a really sweet dog that watches over me. And it's another diary quilt that has a lot of abstraction that's perhaps hiding some more secrets in it. This is a very romantic quilt that I made, and it's me in front of Lake Michigan. And one detail is that this furniture in the quilt, we've got 2 chairs. That's me thinking about me and my partner and how we are together, but a little bit independent. And then here I have a chair by itself. And those are the moments where I'm off doing my own thing and I'm not checking in with my partner at all. There are moments here with a couch where I think of us as a united couple, as a we or an us. And at the very bottom, it's hard to see, but there are 2 rocking chairs. And that's me really dreaming about us being together long into the future. And then I have some ways to contact me. I have a website. You can see everything that I do is Heidi Parkes. I get a lot of questions about supplies, and so you can see those supplies on my website. And then, like Amanda, I'm on Instagram, and I'm always showing the most up-to-date, present moment things on Instagram. So thank you, everyone, for putting some questions in. I see that there's a question, and I'm going to see if I can answer that. So can you talk more about the therapy quilts? Hopefully, I think I did. Maybe I did that since the question was asked. And then the other question is, do some of your quilt ideas come out of your therapy sessions? Yes, they absolutely do come sometimes from therapy sessions, especially if I'm lamenting, oh, I'm so sad about this or that, or it's hard. And then we talk about, well, how could it be less hard? What could you do to support that? One of the things that I do a lot in my quilts is a technique that I call verbing. So whatever action it is that I'm supposed to be doing in the real world, I try to think about a microcosm action of how I could be doing that in my quilt. And for example, in the pink quilt that won an award recently, there are lots of little clumps of applique. And I had been doing a lot of tidying up my studio because I was lamenting that it, like right now, it's very messy in here because I'm sewing and making things and very busy. But I wanted to remind myself to tidy up. And so part of that process for me of tidying up is putting like with like, finding all the straight pins and putting them in one container, finding all the fabric and folding it and putting it on the fabric shelf. Like Zak's is so beautiful in his fabric shelf right now, very organized. So on the quilt, I was putting like with like, and then hopefully that will cause me to do more putting like with like in my real life as well. So that's one small example that I might come to therapy and say, oh, it's so messy, I can't keep up. And then we talk about, well, what would you do to keep up? And then how can I do a microcosm version of that in the quilt? And we'll have a lot more time for questions later too. So onward to Zak.
Well, thank you, Heidi. Thank you, Amanda. You know, the 3 of us are such good friends. We've known each other for years. And it's been interesting for me to listen to you present your work again. I pick up new details about your process and what you're thinking with every time we get together to do these kind of things. So thank you for sharing. If we could go ahead and pull up my slides. There we go. I want to give you just a really quick tour of quilting culture in the USA. But first, that's me at 10 years old. I was cute. That was the year I made my very first quilt. It had 4 pieces of fabric and I was very proud of it. I didn't quilt again for a long time, but here I am again at age 31. I'm 44 now. You can do the math, working on a quilt. So I fell in love with quilting about 14 years ago, and here I am today. I like to say that I've been chain smoking quilts for about 14 years, one than the other. This is the first quilter I ever knew in real life. This is my partner's grandma. We call her Mama, which is what a lot of folks in East Tennessee call their grandparents. And I was famous for like 2 days because I got to help work on this quilt for the rapper, the musician, the pop star ASAP Rocky, whose boyfriend, husband perhaps, I do believe they're married, of Rihanna. I got to make the red side of this quilt when it walked down the white carpet at the Met Gala. So that was pretty cool. Now, here's how quilts fit into American culture. And I'm going to give you the 2-minute version, which means I'm going to have to leave out a lot. But just to give you an idea, that the earliest colonial American quilts that we have were from the 1700s, and they tended to be whole cloth quilts, meaning solid pieces of fabric with really intricate, in this case, stitching to bring out the pattern. This one was dyed in indigo, but sometimes they would use prints. And I love this print. Here you see one that is reminiscent of a quarter, an American quarter, and that is the profile of George Washington. From whole cloth quilts, we move into block pattern quilts, and they are wonderful and varied. There's so many different kinds. These are just two. I picked one called New York Beauty and another one called Carolina Lily because I'm from the state of North Carolina and I lived in New York for 15 years. So that gives you an idea of how we can use that regular symmetry of quilt blocks to make a quilt. Now, not everybody's using patterns. Some people, like Harriet Powers here, use applique to tell stories, and we love stories, right? I just recently ran across this idea from Pablo Neruda, the Chilean poet, who said that stories always have two parts, the net and the air that goes through the net. What you see and what you don't see, what you hear and what you don't hear, right? And so Harriet Powers, along with many other artists, are playing with what you see and what you don't see, what lies underneath. We have some artists who have gotten really clever and creative with playing with pattern, notably the folks from Gee's Bend, Alabama. One of my favorite and one of my idols, Irene Williams, made this back in 2003. And there's just a fun USA quote for you, just because, here we are. I love this one. Now, as Heidi referenced, the quilting bee in American culture is iconic, right? Like we have this idea that quilting was the ultimate communal craft. And it was in a large part, right? Oftentimes the woman or the maker would make the quilt top on their own during the winter months when things were quieter. And then in the spring, they would get together in groups and have quilting bees where they could quilt up a whole quilt in an afternoon while the kids were running around and the men were playing music and different things, right? They have this wonderful tradition, especially in the part of the country where I live, that sometimes it could be hard to quilt an entire quilt in one day. So you needed the ability to get it out of your space for a while. And so here you can see a quilt frame that they've raised up to the ceiling to make room for a dance party in the living room. Whenever they're ready to quilt again, they can lower that quilt and pull up a chair and get to work. We don't do that as much these days. This is what modern quilting bees tend to look like on the computer, all of us zooming in from different places, but it's still a wonderful way to connect. I do a lot of that with my online community called the Quilting Up. Now, quilts and stories go hand in hand. This is one that I particularly love. My grandmother, who lived to be 107 years old, passed away 2 years ago, and she spent the last 3 years of her life in my childhood home where my mom was her caretaker. And she would wear this purple velvet bathrobe every day at breakfast, drinking coffee. She would change right after breakfast because she wanted to be in nice clothes in case company stopped by. But this was what she wore in the morning. And so when she passed away, I knew that was the one piece of fabric I wanted to turn into a quilt. And there's so many special textiles here in this piece. You'll see on the left, there's a piece of lace that she brought with her from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, where she was born in the 1920s. And then she wore it on her wedding day, and now I put it into this quilt. And quilts can tell literal stories too, right? Like here you see words that I'll read them to you because it can be a little hard to see on the screen. But these words tell the story of the quilt. It says, "This was Grandma's bathrobe. I made it into a quilt sitting on my mama's porch, sitting on my mama's screened-in porch, listening to the Carolina wrens in the morning and katydids at night. So listening to the birds and the bugs living out in the forest. I love using found materials, right? So you got like my grandma's bathrobe. I was at the beach 2 winters ago and I found this shirt just sitting in the sand. So it's the tan piece that you see in the middle. And I picked it up and knew immediately that there was so much story in this shirt that I wanted to tease out. You can see in parts of it, there's orange, the color orange. It's been discolored. That must have been at some point the shirt has wrapped itself around a piece of iron somewhere in the ocean and has rusted and discolored. It's only half a shirt. If you could piece it all together, I don't know what happened to the other half. But what a beautiful iteration of a story is like a net, right? You have the net, what you can see, and you have the air that goes between it, what you don't. This was made out of a shirt that I found in the middle of the street in Brooklyn, New York when I was living there. This shirt must have been in the middle of the road for weeks because when I picked it up, it was flat. Cars had driven over it and it was just like a pancake. So I picked it up, and when I opened it up, I saw that the sun had faded it and made bleached patterns throughout the quilt. And you can see that on the left-hand side and the detail on the right. And what felt so special to me about this garment was the way that you could see its entire history side by side. And it made me think about time a little bit differently, right? We often think of time as being linear. Yesterday happened, now or today, and then tomorrow is going to happen. And just time keeps moving. But what if also time stacks up on itself and it's just constantly layering on itself? In this shirt, you see that idea. You can see the bright white parts that were the original bleached cotton. You can see the olive green that they dyed it in the factory where the shirt was made. You can see where the sun bleached it. And then you can also see, as in the bottom right-hand corner, where I took some material that bleached the fabric. When this you see, remember me. So all of this is telling a story about how we think about time, how we see ourselves in time, and how the past truly does coexist with the present. In that vein, this is a piece I made with starting from a silver dollar that my grandfather gave me. In fact, the title, as you can see on your screen, is I got this silver dollar from my granddad. And then AKA in the very fine print in the bottom right-hand corner, how the wealth of my family or how the wealth of my ancestors helped me go to college. And so this is a family tree of sorts, 5 generations, and it's comparing 2 things that I wanted people to see. One, the members of my family that engaged in slavery and enslaved African and African American slaves. And then also, I wanted to share which of these ancestors had access to higher education. And you can see in my family, at least, that the people that engaged in slavery and exploited the labor of other people were able to pay their way and get access into higher education all the way down through the current day. If you look at the bottom left-hand corner, that's me, right? So I am continuing in this pattern and tradition of my family in many ways. I like to think about the past quite a bit, but I also love to think about the future. And I'm curious why humans, we seem to have this tendency to think about the future in catastrophic, apocalyptic terms. We tend to think that everything is getting worse and everything is going to collapse. Maybe that's true. There's plenty of evidence for that, but also maybe it's not true, right? What if we began to tell ourselves different kinds of stories about our future and what's possible? So this is a piece called Apogee Jubilee. Apogee is a reference to the moon. When the moon is as far away from the earth as it can be, when it's so far from home that it has no choice but to turn around and start coming back to center, that's apogee, that point on its orbit. And so there's this natural precedent that says, oh, look, we can stray very far from home. We can also come back to center. I have a podcast I like Seam Side, we talk about the inner work of textiles and we explore all kinds of stories. I've had the great good fortune of talking to a lot of folks. And so if you like the stories that you've heard me and Heidi and Amanda talk about today, I'd encourage you to check out Seam Side. If you want to keep in touch, you can take out your phone and scan that QR code. It will take you to all the links. So it'll take you to my website. You can get on my email list. You can listen to the podcast. You can take a workshop, all kinds of things. So that QR code I'll leave up for you just a moment. Maybe we can also drop some of these things in the chat. I know we all have contact information. I don't know if that's possible, but that'd be very much appreciated. And with that, I'm going to open the floor to Q&A to my friends Heidi and Amanda. What we got, folks?
Zach, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I see one question in here that's asking about the metal quilt that I referenced. And I would say that it's very common here in America to just kind of say, if the maker calls it a quilt, it's a quilt. And certain quilt shows you can or can't enter based on different details like that. So Quilt Con that Zach and I had our quilt, Yes, More Please in, that would say, no, you can't put a metal quilt in here. It needs a backing and batting and binding. But Quilt National that I was just in this weekend, they would say, metal quilt, bring it on. We love that idea. We want more. So it's different shows have different parameters, but in terms of is it a quilt or isn't it, it tends to be if the maker wants to call it a quilt, it is. And we don't ask questions, we just go forward. And Amanda, you were about to share something.
Oh, I was just going to reflect on Zach's presentation and some of the, like the shirts that were kind of bleached by the sun, or just your investigation with materials. I had forgotten about those quilts, and it made me think about something I did this weekend. I finished a quilt, and I see there's another question about how long a quilt takes. So that kind of, that's why this part is kind of funny, because quilts take a very long time to make, depending on how much using a machine or how much detail, or I guess that can really vary. But we can go back to that question. But I finished a quilt and I just wasn't quite happy with it. And I just don't want to finish something and just not be quite happy. I feel like it's not finished yet then. Or it's something I set aside and I just say I learned a lot from it and now I'll move on to the next piece. But I really wanted this to be a resolved piece. So I put it outside in the backyard on some rocks and I dumped bleach on it. And my sister said, you diluted the bleach with water, right? And I said, no, I just used it. And then I waited to the next day and then I put it in the wash and then I dyed it with a blue dye and then I washed it again. And now I'm repairing it and it's like all the quilting disintegrated. It's just, but it reminds me of those quilts, Zach, that you just showed, how you found a shirt in the middle of the street and thinking like, oh, I want that to happen. How can you accelerate that? And so that was it's just kind of cool to see. I mean, I don't want to incorporate bleach into my work. That's not a good chemical to be working with. I don't want this to be a routine thing, but it's just interesting to see like what unexpected things could happen and how you can work with them to kind of repair them, or kind of chance coming into your work, I guess. But that's what it made me think about. But what do you all think about how long does it take to make a quilt? I see that question.
Well, is it our buddy Luke's answer? Doesn't he always say, Heidi, my whole life?
That's a good one.
Yes. Very good one, yeah. Yeah, because I've gotten much faster over time. And so the answer now is different from the answer in the beginning. And I would say I've made quilts in like a couple hours if they're small. And then I've also spent probably 200 or 300 hours making my longest quilts. But I prefer not to know how long they take. So I tend to say, well, I started that in August and I finished it in February. Like, that's a knowable answer to me. How many minutes I spent from August till February, it doesn't spark joy for me to count the time in that way. Even so, though, like even if it takes 300 hours,
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of a better way to spend 300 hours. I mean, we've all got one life to live, so we might as well do the thing that we love. And if we love quilting, then 300 hours it is. I will say similar, Heidi, that over the course of my life, career with quilting, I'm much more comfortable with investing a lot of time into a single project. In the beginning, I wanted to produce a lot quickly, but now I see how, well, y'all take a look. Now I see how quickly they build up. And so I'm like, I don't know if I need to make hundreds of quilts. Maybe I just need to make 3 really good ones this year. Right.
Agreed. I totally
Let's see you try to just do that. I know that you're too excited about quilt making to just make 3. But I hear you. The same thing. I go back and forth. But also not everything has to be finished. And also quilt making to me is like something I brought into my life after I was a painter, because it's something that I can be interrupted a lot with my kids. I can be quilting and then run into the kitchen and throw some dinner together, and then just like while it's cooking I can go do some more work. And so I feel like it's so chopped up, it's hard to keep track. But I do enjoy watching TV or like Netflix or some kind of movie or documentary during it, so I can say, oh, I watched 5 documentaries while I made this quilt or something, and then I can kind of guess at how long it took to make. But if you do, but do you also work on lots of different, like I work on a lot of different projects, so it's not like I only work on one quilt so it's done and then move to the next thing, so it's hard to,
yeah. So like, oh, I took 5 seasons of that TV show.
yeah.
And then how did those
that counts for 50 hours of making it, and then there's more time after that. We have a few questions about American quilting, and also how does quilting differ in other countries. And I would say that I've personally been very lucky to have students, especially in my online classes, join me from a lot of different countries. So within the last 2 years, I've had students who are living in Canada, Mexico, France, Germany, Austria, Saudi Arabia, Australia. It's amazing because they'll be awake at 3 a.m. to take my class live. And that time difference is really striking. And so I find that I'm able to find like-minded quilters who want to learn from me in a lot of different countries. And then if I'm looking for other trends or quilters doing other kinds of things, that's maybe a little harder for me to find, because those quilters aren't naturally reaching out to me or taking my classes. But I do find that both handwork and machine quilting are popular around the world. I would say currently in America, I think there are more quilters working with machines than by hand. But I think there's also a pretty robust group who, like me, love working with their hands. Especially Zak, with the Quilting Nook, I imagine you have quilters from all over the world as well.
Absolutely. I mean, there's good creative folks everywhere. My sense is, and I'm no authority on this, but my sense is that when people come to me to learn or to join the Nook, they feel like they're the only quilter they know quilting in the way they want to quilt. Mm-hmm. That maybe, like I'm thinking Australia, for example, maybe there is an established quilting practice, but it tends to be more pattern quilts and traditional quilts, or what we might consider, modern improv, right? And they're not seeing. I think in the U.S. we have a broader spectrum of what a quilt can be, and I wonder if that spectrum is narrower in other places.
You saying that reminds me that a lot of my German students especially are lamenting, oh, I don't know anyone who wants to quilt improvisationally by hand. And then it's fun because sometimes I can introduce them to each other, because I've had at least 4 German quilters in my classes. So I know there are at least 4. But yes, there can be sometimes a loneliness if you're doing something outside of blocks and machine piecing and machine quilting. And, I know, like within people who live in Milwaukee, there's a small handful of people who quilt like me, and a lot of them it's because they've taken my classes, so they quilt like me. But back in 2015 on Instagram is when Zak and I met. And Zak found one of my quilts and liked it and made a comment. And then eventually we started bantering back and forth and following each other. And we've never lived in the same place as one another. You were in New York State before, and now you're in Tennessee. And I think we have a famous friendship within the quilt world. We love each other and each other's quilts, and we've learned so much and influenced back and forth. And we were never next door neighbors. We only met online and then created a deep friendship by using the phone to call each other. And so I think it's really exciting that kind of friendship and connection can exist now in a way that you were more confined to how your neighbors were quilting in the past.
And I'm going to see you, Heidi, next week. And Amanda, I'm going to spend the night at your house one of those nights because I'm going to need a pit stop on the road. Mm-hmm. So it's beautiful to think that, yeah, the internet brought us together, but now we make it a point to get together in person, mm-hmm. which I would love to hear your thoughts about collaborations, because all three of us have collaborated with one. I don't think we've ever done a three-way collaboration, which we should really
Amanda and I don't technically have a collaborative quilt that we can say we made this one together.
I'm just waiting for you to invite me to collaborate with you on something.
Oh, we need to. This will be the spark that makes it happen. We should.
But yeah, there was a question about collaborating. Mm-hmm. Have we ever collaborated?
And what has that taught you or shown you?
Yeah, so it's an important way of trying out new techniques. For example, when Zak and I made Yes More Please, we both pushed each other to do things that we frequently do in our own work that we don't normally do, that the other one doesn't normally do. And so there was a moment when Zak and I were working with one piece of base fabric, like this quilt behind me is one big piece of gray that I added onto. And then we were going to go in the evening because I was doing a lecture, and Zak wanted to sew a little bit on that during the lecture. And so I just cut a big hunk of it off and said, Zak, you can embroider on this. And he was shocked that I would just chop up the quilt. But for example, that pink quilt that I showed before, there's a space where there was a big hole where the bunnies ultimately were. But previously, there were little bits of blue applique from putting like with like. And I decided I didn't like where that blue applique was. So I just cut it out and moved it to the top right corner. And then I used more of the pink fabric that I had. And I did something called reverse applique to patch the hole. And then I got to have the rabbits where I wanted them instead of those darn blue circles. And so I really like that feeling of flexibility and movement. And I was able to introduce Zak to some of that freedom that I feel by cutting off a big hunk. Mm-hmm. So that's like one small example of a fun interaction that happened with collaborating.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to collaborate. I think my first moments of collaborating as a quilter with folks I met through social media were just like, I'm going to start something and mail it to you, and then you can add to it and mail it back, and kind of like that. And then when I collaborated with you, Zak, on a couple quilts, we actually sat together on the couch and quilted into the pieces at the same time. So there's that. So you have to really want to spend time with that person, and if you're going to be like sitting next to them quilting the same piece. And I've also worked, and you two worked also, where you just take a piece, you start together and chop the whole thing in half in a kind of an interesting way and take them to separate places, and then later bring them back together and try to stitch them together like they've never been separated. So I think there's a lot of different ways that we've collaborated, I know, which is really fun. Or even just responding to another person's work, like maybe that could be a collaboration as well.
Yeah, Amanda, I feel like we do a lot of that kind of collaboration because you took my class on making a framed quilt, something that's stretched around a wooden frame. And so I introduced you to that idea, that way of working. And then you made a whole bunch, and I was like, oh my goodness, of course you could do this and you can do that. And so that back and forth, that conversation that we're having with new pieces, that does feel very much like collaboration.
Yeah, it snowballs.
I think one of the first times I collaborated was that Zak was doing a collaborative quilt of 43 portraits, and you put a call out. You just said on Instagram, I'm looking for people to make these quilts. And it was something like a Google Drive spreadsheet that you had. So you had all the names of the people who needed portraits, and we could go in and put our name next to the portrait and commit to making it. And then we mailed them all to you in New York, and you sewed them together, and then you gifted the quilt to, to the place that you wanted to. And it was just really a powerful thing to be able to make a quilt collaboratively, and just to trust that there were 43 people out there who wanted to donate making a portrait, and that we were all going to get behind you and help make that quilt happen.
And that's what I think gets at what makes patchwork and piecing together smaller pieces of fabric such a powerful analogy, or a powerful way of understanding our life and times. That in a quilt where you're bringing together all these little pieces of fabric, they might be really different from one another, but you find a way to make it work. You find a way to get along. You find a way to coexist. If a quilt can do it, maybe we can do it too.
So we've got one last question, and Tessa's asking us, do you have a favorite quilt that you've made? What makes it special to you?
That's like asking a parent their favorite child. I don't. I hope my quilts aren't listening. I'd hate to hurt anybody's feelings.
I feel like each quilt I finish, it's usually, with each quilt I make, it's like there's something that's familiar that I've done before, but then there's always something like new that I'm trying. So I feel like it's always the latest one that I've made that I'm like, I could never part with this. This is so exciting. And I think that the moment that stops happening, I might be in a rut. I don't know what that feels like yet, because I'm just constantly thinking about like, what's the next thing I'm going to make? But I think, I don't have a particular one, but I think the momentum is from just like taking something because I feel like even if you just absolutely love this one quilt, well, you can do it again. You can bring the same ideas into the next one, or the same techniques, and then it can even be better. So there's always going to be a better one coming. Hopefully there's a lot of better quilts coming. What do you all think?
I agree 100% with both of those answers, that I'm sometimes partial to the most recent one just because I'm in the flow of it, but also just like children, I couldn't pick a favorite. They're all so special. And some of them, maybe some of the ones that aren't like as special, maybe I love them even more because they taught me something about what I want a quilt by me to look like. And so there's that feeling of gratitude. Oh, you're, and so then that helps me by knowing its opposite. It helps me know what I want to put energy to into the future. And maybe it's not even what it aesthetically looks like, but maybe sometimes I get very wrapped up as well in how it felt to make it compared to what it looks like. And those are two different things. So I really love that blue quilt that I made, that I started my presentation with, but I'm not eager to make another one like it super soon because I love handwork so much. And that was really a lot of time at the sewing machine. So I'm glad I did it. I love the result, but I'm due for some TV time.
Yeah. That makes me think, when you were talking, I was like, oh yeah, I was thinking of just the end product, like the aesthetics of it. But you're right. When you were talking, it made me think of this particular quilt that like I'll never get that back. So like the time that I was in when I was making it was the beginning of like when the school in 2020, when our school shut down and I was living at home with the kids and we were doing school from home, and the kids, my children, were a lot younger than they are now, and they were cutting into my quilt because I asked them to. And then I was repairing it. And so the whole quilt is just a collaboration with my kids. And now if I asked them to do that, they'd be like, oh, I'm busy. I'm going to go outside. So I think, there's that snapshot of time that I'll never get back. So I think that's probably maybe that's my favorite quilt.
You've captured it.
Amazing.
You've captured it
with your children, Amanda. I think about the one that where your kiddo made drawings and then you embroidered all of the drawings in a big grid. And so it was like a traditional block quilt, but it was also so different from that because it was embroidery based and such playful drawings.
Yeah, and they're getting older now, and so it's a little sad, but it's just a new chapter. I feel like that's what's so cool about quilting is that you go through these, phases. And now I get to see, like, my sister has gotten into quilting and she has a 4-year-old. And that's the age my son was when he was doing so much drawing in my quilts. And so now he's 10 and my sister is now having her little kid draw in her quilts. And I'm just like, oh, cool. Maybe she's doing that because she saw that modeled through my relationship with my kids, but it's just exciting to see. You get through whatever phase of life with, I guess the quilts really help through lots of our phases of life getting,
It could be, I can see how it could feel a little bit sad or maybe nostalgic thinking back on those quilts, but kids are going to grow up. We're going to get older. At least we have quilts to show for it, right?
Yeah.
Like at least we can look back and be like, oh, I made all these things.
Yeah.
To capture the time.
It's a document. Journal. Yeah.
Well, everyone, thank you so much for being here and watching our presentation all the way to the end. I hope you've kept track of ways to look us up. If you type in any of our names plus the word quilt, you will definitely find us on the internet.
Sounds good. Thank y'all so much for joining us.
Thanks,
Heidi,
everyone.
Amanda, I'll see you this weekend.
Yes, in person.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.